health. We're going to speak really from it at a global focus and focus on contemporary work where we are currently in this dialogue in light of the increased emphasis on health at COP28 and other forums, and really talk about future pathways and directions for this important work, particularly at the academic sector. Here is a list of presentations that we're going to talk through today. We're going to really speak about the rise of academic institutions in climate change and health and future directions for research, and then we're going to turn to social determinants of health in shaping climate change and resilience, harnessing new approaches to climate and health research, and then converging pathways for global health and climate governance. And then we're hopefully going to have a short Q&A. And so with that, I want to do a quick introduction to all of our speakers. And I'm going to start very quickly with myself. I am Arianne Teherani. I am on faculty in the School of Medicine and the Department of Medicine, and I am the founding co-director for the University of California Center for Climate, Health, and Equity. We're a 10-campus and 6-health system endeavor in California. And then I would like to introduce my collaborator, Jennifer Monroe-Zakaris. She's the Associate Director for Strategy and Communication and the UC Center for Climate, Health, and Equity. She seeks to communicate the center's climate and health evidence and messaging for varied audiences and to propel ambitious climate action that promotes health, advances health equity. She has an extensive research background in the social and structural determinants of health, as well as in sexual and reproductive health, gender empowerment, and masculinities. And she has a master's in public health from Columbia University. Our second speaker is Taylor Simmons. She's a master's student in the Environmental Health Sciences program at the University of Arizona. Taylor is interested in learning more about how climate change and opportunistic pathogens affect arid regions and their water systems, and she hopes to find ways to influence policy that incorporates community knowledge and considers social determinants of health to inform solutions and intervention strategies. Our next speaker will be Vito Telesca. He is associate professor at the University of Basilicata. He is an expert in surface hydrology, in particular weather variability and human health, numerical algorithms for climate models, machine and deep learning environmental models, leakage and water distribution systems, and soil vegetation atmosphere transfer. His PhD is in environmental monitoring, and he's authored over 120 papers in research on national and international journals, meeting proceedings, and workshop reports. And our final speaker will be Aparna Roy. She is a fellow and lead climate change and energy at the Observer Research Foundation in India. Aparna's primary research is on the politics of climate change, resilience building, environmental governance. Her work aims to generate critical insights on the contested science and the risk of climate change impacts on sustainable development goals in the global south, and probe the effectiveness of building the resilience of the development sectors and explore the future of resilience in an increasingly climate-constrained world. So you're going to get to hear a little bit about sort of various different lenses into the climate change and health work that we've been doing. So first we're going to turn very quickly to talk about our first work, which is focused on really looking at the rise of academic institutions that really are focused on climate change and health in particular. So to give you a bit of an overview, academic research centers have been entities that have been formed to address societal problems for which we have that can't really be answered by one department or one school. And if we look at the history of these centers, they've really been focused on, they're situated at universities, and they're really focused on solving a direct societal problem, one for which you need many different minds to it. The rise of academic centers came about after World War II, when institutions really began to realize that there were some real-world problems that they couldn't solve within a department or within a school. And so this gave rise to the development of centers. And centers have played a very, very important role in directing, the dialogue in society and thinking about where research should go, and really focusing on generating research that really impacts the direction of policies and practices, so on and so forth. In their original form, the research centers really have been producers of research, period. And that's really been their primary goal. So they bring this interdisciplinary view into a societal problem and move it forward that way. And when we look at sort of the history of centers, we see that their impact has been really threefold in influencing the people and the institutions. So really we see that research has shown that academic research centers help grow the careers of people in ways that gets them sort of out of their area, builds networks across disciplines, and really solidifies that person's identity as not just a single discipline, but one who solves a particular problem from their angle. And we see that impact also carry over to institutions. So the institution then becomes recognized not just for having, for example, the best biochemistry department in the world, but really more for having solved world problems to X, Y, Z. And then finally, there have been some work over the past 50 years that's really looked at how the research from centers impacts the ways in which society does business. And so, the impact of that research on the day-to-day practice, on policy, and then on generating further evidence. And what's been very interesting to see is that the climate and health centers, or climate and health justice focus centers, have really begun to sprout up. And we'll talk a little bit about what that data looks like and really the current space that they occupy and what we're learning in that space. The slides are not up.
They were.
Oh, they were? And they're back. Okay, great. All right, so to give you a sense of what we wanted to do, we began this project by conducting a landscape analysis of a select series of climate and health centers throughout the world to really get a sense of what their mission and vision is and how they've chosen to isolate their focus, and then subsequently what are the values that they hold dear to that focus. And our implications, our intent from this work was really to use existing evidence on the impacts, what we understand about academic centers, to project the directions of climate and health centers, really think about where there are opportunities for success and impact, especially as we're seeing the growth of centers in this area, and really ultimately impact on planetary challenge that's really facing our society. This, I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but all I'll tell you is this is kind of our methodology. We went through a comprehensive search of 1,200 centers, narrowed them down to US and non-US centers, of which the latter were about 459, and then in the US it was about 30 or so. And then we began to really search for their mission and vision within those to sort of bring it down to two kinds of entities that we found. The first one was what we call a specialized climate and health center. So that's really a center that focused very directly on climate change and health. It's got an independent vision and mission, and it has more than one research team in it, and its really sole focus is on climate and health. The second kind of entity we found was that there was a broader research center, so for example, a climate science center, or there was an environmental health center. And then within that, there may have been a research theme or working group that was related to climate change and health. And that was what we called a broader research center. So what we really did for this project was we looked to see that there were of the specialized centers, there were 26 across 5 countries, and then the broader research centers, there were 33 broader research centers from 18 countries and regions throughout the world. Sorry, wrong one. And this may be a bit hard for you to see, but sort of the white pins are where you see where all the current centers are currently located throughout the world. And these are everything. This is the specialized centers and also the broader centers that have climate change and health as a component of them. And with that, I'm going to turn to Jen.
Hi, everyone. So I apologize in advance. I'm a mother of young children and, of course, caught a little bug from them about a week ago, and my voice is a little rough right now, so I apologize in advance. So as Arianne mentioned, for the purposes of this presentation and for this analysis, we're looking at a subset of centers that are specifically focused exclusively on climate change and health. Do you have the-
Yeah, I'm trying to get this.
So, I apologize, one sec.
We're having technical difficulties.
Want me to grab my computer? So the majority of these centers, the 26, the majority are in the US, and there's about 7 or so that are non-US, and that's primarily in Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia. Most of the research centers conduct original research and applied research on climate change and health. Some of them state that they just have kind of a broad focus on research. Others specify specific climate exposures or issues that they're interested in, such as climate-related migration or extreme heat. Some of them specify specific health outcomes that they're interested in, such as infectious diseases or mental health or injuries. Education and training is also a big focus of quite a few centers. A lot of these efforts, so they are geared towards a wide range of learners, from undergraduates and graduate students to postdoctoral students, medical students and residents, and even faculty and staff. These educational efforts seek to diversify the climate health workforce, prepare a new generation of climate health leaders, and boost climate health literacy, either through creating new classes that are about climate change and health, or by incorporating themes of climate change and health into existing curricula. And then over a third of the centers claim that they take an interdisciplinary approach to their climate health work, often by engaging investigators and faculty across multiple departments within their academic institution and even beyond. And the last thing I'll just mention is that, most of these centers are relatively new. We have data on the founding date for most of them. So the earliest that we found was founded in 2009, which is the Columbia Climate Center and the Earth Institute at Columbia University. And the most recent was founded in 2023. And actually more than half of the centers were founded in the last 5 years alone. So the growth of these centers has really been a very recent phenomenon. So you can go to the next slide, sorry. So in terms of like an overarching focus, nearly every center claimed that they focused on climate change adaptation and or mitigation. And this could be through conducting research, establishing best practices, training new health professionals, influencing policy, disseminating information to the public. For example, one center claims to conduct applied research focused on the public health benefits of climate mitigation and adaptation strategies. So that was really a very big focus of nearly all of the centers. When we were looking at their mission and vision, there were several common themes that we found. Basically, the high-level goals can be categorized into 2 broad buckets. One is protecting and improving health outcomes, both physical and mental, in the face of climate change hazards and stressors. The other is strengthening community resilience to the adverse impacts of climate change, and that was often through strengthening preparedness efforts within those communities. Another very common goal was to build or strengthen diverse partner networks across academia, health systems, government, local communities. And the purpose of these networks were to work collectively towards not only creating new knowledge, but also generating climate health solutions. Several centers sought to take these networks and use them to make climate health research and information more widely available and more accessible to the public, in particular to communities who are most vulnerable to and impacted by the adverse impacts of climate change. Some of the centers also were engaged directly in policy work, either using their research findings or their subject matter expertise to influence policy outcomes at the local, state, national, and international levels. And then finally, there were a few centers, including our own actually, that are working to improve the climate readiness of the health sector. So this could include, through initiatives including pilot programs to prepare health systems to better respond to the health impacts of climate change, such as how to prepare for surges in patients during a heat wave. And some centers are also looking at how to reduce the emissions footprint of health sector because it's quite a large contributor to emissions. In terms of center values, we found that the majority of the climate and health centers do reference issues of equity in the context of climate change. Common considerations include how climate change drives health inequities, so not only adverse health outcomes, but inequitable outcomes among certain communities. How climate change, or basically how vulnerability to adverse climate health impacts has shaped which communities are most vulnerable and why. And then also an interest in how to increase the resilience of the most affected frontline communities to these impacts. So for example, several centers are conducting research to understand which communities are most impacted by climate and health issues and in what ways. There was at least one center that sought to create a climate inequity framework that could help drive work in this area. And a few centers are describing using information about climate vulnerability and equity in order to train the next generation of climate and health leaders to better engage with communities and to advocate for climate action that is centered around equity and the voices of those most impacted. So where does this leave us? I mean, this is a very high-level review, but it does give us some really interesting takeaways that kind of jump out to us. One of them is that, as Arianne mentioned, academic centers have traditionally been primarily or exclusively focused on original research, generating new knowledge. And we see that this is certainly a focus of nearly all of the climate change and health centers, but they don't limit their impact to this. They see education efforts as vital, which is not surprising given the important role of education in increasing awareness of the climate crisis and in increasing the urgency of action around the climate crisis. And also, what's really important is that a lot of these centers are seeking to connect this evidence and this knowledge to practice and policy for real-world impact. So really trying to channel this into policy, into initiatives, into mitigation and adaptation strategies, and from the local to global levels. And they're also increasingly exploring non-traditional research avenues, such as evaluation research and community participatory action research, for both devising and evaluating climate health solutions. And finally, equity is a concern of most climate change and health centers, which is great, and we were very happy to see this. The one caveat is that it's unclear, so many of them, have a commitment to reducing health inequities, to reducing vulnerabilities. It's unclear to which they include direct engagement with the most affected communities in setting their research agendas, in devising solutions, and that's obviously a really important part of that piece. So that said, there's a lot more that we need to understand. So our group plans to extend the next phase of this research into a deeper exploration of the characteristics of these climate and health centers, including through in-depth interviews with key constituents. And we'd like to understand better, their structure, their reach and impact, their successes and challenges, and their funding streams. This helps to create some transparency for how these centers are forming, and also can just help us get a better sense of what's working, what's not, and how we can all band together to really pool our collective efforts to generate solutions in this space to the extent that we can. And I believe, Arianne, you said that we are planning to present those findings at the next COP?
Yeah.
Is that right?
We'll have them ready. Yes.
Okay, so they will be ready by next year's COP, hopefully.
Awesome.
Yes.
Right.
Because I could just take the clicker? Or do
Oh,
you
yeah.
I could also.
Perfect. That's
Okay,
great.
thank you. Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor Simmons. I'm a graduate researcher at the University of Arizona. And today I'm going to be talking about research conducted with the university and Muhimbili University of Health and Allied Sciences in Tanzania. And the PI of the project is with us today. So if we reach any hard questions, he'll be able to answer those for us. But this research project looked at how social determinants of health shape climate change resilience and health outcomes in Tanzania. So I know that research question comes with a lot of maybe unfamiliar terms for some. So we're going to spend the next couple of slides defining those more clearly, as well as talking about why we chose Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and findings of the project along the pathway at the bottom of the screen here that will lead us to some informed sustainable development recommendations. So, what is resilience? Essentially, it's a person or community's ability to recover from adversity. And there are three well-accepted stages. First is absorption. How well is the community prepared to handle the shock? And second is adaptation. What is the community doing to adapt to the shock? And then three is restoration. What does it take to get that community back to pre-event stage scenario? And a good example of this is COVID-19, right? We were not prepared to handle COVID-19. We attempted several methods of adaptation, like masking and working from home. And I'm not sure if we've reached the stage of restoration just yet. Last I checked, there were 770 million cases and 7 million deaths attributed to COVID. When you throw in climate change into the mix, climate change resilience is not well defined in the literature, it's challenging to measure, but using this Global South paradigm of governance and leadership is the foundation of climate change resilience. Are they employing the responsible agencies to notify those on the ground about what's going on? And do those on the ground have the self-efficacy, the tools that they need to make a difference? And so this study in particular looked at what the locals know and what they're doing in relation to climate change. Also, it's well accepted in the literature that social determinants of health play a major role in communities' resilience. So what are these? There are a lot of elements mentioned on this slide, but to summarize it, it's essentially where you live, are born, and work, and how that influences your health outcomes. We know more about someone based on their zip code than their gene code at this point. And this study in particular looked at their access to water, sanitation, and health, and how that affects their health outcomes. Climate change affects a lot of the factors mentioned on the previous slide. Climate change is a social determinant of health and predictor of resilience by exacerbating other social determinants of health. So it's well accepted that carbon dioxide emissions are one of the main contributors of climate change. And despite developing countries not contributing much to carbon dioxide emissions, they are still suffering the consequences. There is an unfair debt burden on developing countries to deal with the impacts of climate change, despite not benefiting from the industrial advancements. So we touched on a lot of the research question topics. Now I'd like to talk about Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. We chose Dar es Salaam because it's a model community to assess how climate change is influencing health outcomes. Located along the Indian Ocean, they are much more at risk for climate change impacts like rising sea temperatures. It's getting hotter there. There's intrusion of seawater into drinking water sources, coupled with lack of infrastructure and poor sanitation, and a densely populated area, one of the most densely populated in Tanzania, you're going to see more health outbreaks, waterborne illnesses. So, to assess the connection between climate change resilience and access to water and sanitation and health, we conducted household surveys to assess their climate change resilience. And remember, that's what they know and what they're doing in relation to climate change. We also wanted to identify their water access and health access and sanitation as well. And we collected hospital data for two reasons. One, to assess the correlation between outpatient data and climate change data provided by the Tanzania Meteorological Authority. And two, to also create a database for this data, because it's very decentralized and not aggregated well. And so we're working with the communities to get permissions to make this data easily accessible so that they can adapt to outbreaks. So, to our household survey. This survey started in June of 2023 and is ongoing. Right now we have data for about 364 households representing the lives of 2,000 individuals. This table on the right kind of gives you a snapshot of the community that we're working with. So we asked them who the head of household was, and about 70% shared that it was a male figure. So this gives you an identity or an idea about gender dynamics and who holds the positions of power in these communities. We also asked them about monthly income. And the mean monthly income was about 74,000 T shillings, which is the equivalent of $29 US. So that on the surface is okay. No one's below the poverty level. But you break it down by family and you realize that 65% of these families were below that poverty level of $14 a month. We also asked them how often they were paid, and 67% share that they were paid daily. So this gives us an indication that they have unstable employment or maybe reliant on gig jobs. And only 50% had completed their primary education. So let's get into water sources. Looking at this pie chart on the right, you would think, okay, this community is doing okay. 93% of households are relying on protected water sources. That includes clean and covered boreholes, piped in water into the home. Looks like they're doing okay. But you break it down a little more and you realize that 96% share their water sources, 22% treat, and mostly by boiling, which we know doesn't remove all contaminants. 22% share that their water is inconsistent, and only 33% have access to water in their home. The rest have to fetch. And it's mostly women doing the fetching, and no one's taking advantage of rainwater harvesting. So in terms of sanitation, only 52% of these families have access to flushboard toilets, and most share these facilities with other households. 11% had experienced flooding at least once in the last year. And we understand the connection between pit latrine placement in relation to homes and water sources, and how that can influence health outcomes. And throw in climate change into the mix, and flooding, coupled with poor sanitation and location, this can exacerbate waterborne illnesses. Waterborne illnesses are the third cause of death in Africa, according to the World Health Organization. The illnesses we're focused on are cholera and dysentery in particular. Some underlying causes of waterborne illnesses are social determinants of health, like healthcare access, for instance. We asked these communities what inhibits you from visiting the doctor when you need to, and they shared that they didn't have health insurance and that it was too expensive. Climate change is also something we don't think about when it comes to waterborne illnesses. But increase in greenhouse gases leads to more severe climate change impacts like warming oceans, sea level rise, severe natural disasters like flooding, which is happening in these communities, coupled with poor sanitation and lack of infrastructure. You're going to see more cholera outbreaks. And that's what we've been seeing. Cholera has been an endemic in Tanzania since the 1970s. It could end your life within hours of showing symptoms. According to the World Health Organization, cholera cases more than doubled in 2022 in Tanzania. Dysentery is also an issue. With the adequate hydration, it could be fatal, and most of these fatalities are children under 5 years old. So the table on the right kind of gives you a snapshot of these waterborne illnesses. In Tanzania, they have limited cholera surveillance systems, and the data, again, tends to be aggregated. We're still working on recruiting different districts in Dar es Salaam to collect data from 2022 and 2023 related to cholera, but from what we're hearing on the ground, there have been outbreaks. All right, so for climate change resilience, so what they know and what they're doing. So 85% had heard of climate change, and they're linking climate change to increasing temperature, food prices, decreasing food access, and decreasing rainfall. And over 75% shared that it can decrease water access, increase illness, and that significant action is needed. But when we ask them if they've taken any action in the last 5 years, crickets. So this is just a snapshot of what these communities know. And what they're noticing is backed up by data. So here's the mean annual temperature in Tanzania and in Dar es Salaam from 1901 to 2021. It's getting hotter, which is having cascading effects on the living and built environment. So in trying to put all this together, to assess the correlation between waterborne illness and social determinants of health, we saw a significant correlation between someone's disability status and cholera and dysentery. So those who were disabled were more likely to contract cholera or dysentery. And this isn't something we talk about often, but it is possible that maybe those who are disabled have lesser access to water and sanitation and are more at risk of exposure. Additionally, we saw a correlation between water source change, so those who had experienced water source change in the last 5 years were more likely to contract dysentery, and also those who are male. We're still trying to figure out what all this means. So to assess the correlation between climate change resilience and social determinants of health, we noticed that those who were more educated were more likely to connect climate change to waterborne illness, decreased water accessibility, and they were more likely to make those lifestyle changes to mitigate climate change. So I know I just threw a lot of information at you, so we're going to break this down bit by bit. So here's our research question. How do social determinants of health shape health and climate change resilience in Tanzania? So we're seeing increasing waterborne illnesses, and this directly correlated with disability status, water source change, and gender, which are social determinants of health. We also assess climate change resilience, so their ability to adapt and thrive despite adversity. So this accounts for local knowledge, This directly correlated with education. Those who were educated were more likely to link climate change to the catastrophic effects of it. And then self-efficacy. What are they doing? So those 75% believe that significant action is needed. 81% share that they had not taken any action in the last 5 years. So you might be thinking, okay, let's just address climate change, right? We've thought of novel inventions like carbon capture from the oceans and the atmosphere and renewable energy sources and energy storage, but the reality is that we cannot improve our climate change resilience without addressing basic social determinants of health, basic human rights for our global south communities. So it's safe to say that these communities in Dar es Salaam and in other global south communities have not passed that absorption stage. They are not prepared to handle climate change. And so I'd like to introduce some UN-developed sustainable development goals that would directly benefit these communities, like good health and well-being, to strengthen the capacity of all countries, developing countries in particular, for global health risks, and ensure access to water and sanitation for all by 2030. These would directly benefit the communities and would require international collaborations that will co-benefit and build capacity for both parties and allows communities to better adapt in the face of climate change. So in the study, we assessed local knowledge and self-efficacy. It appears that there's not an information deficit. They know what's going on. They just need to be brought to the table when making decisions. They have a limited capacity to handle climate change internally. We need to ask the right questions and be good listeners when determining solutions for these problems. We need a human rights-based approach and to leverage our partnerships to dismantle the injustices in these communities with high climate risk who did not benefit from carbon dioxide emissions. And put these pledges into action, not only for Dar es Salaam, but similar communities around the world. So thank you. This project is so much bigger than myself. I couldn't have done it without all the external collaborators. Thanks.
It's me. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon to everybody. And before my presentation, I call Anna Pirani. Anna Pirani is the Italian responsible of the focal point in the IPCC. Please, a brief introduction.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me. This has been such an interesting session. I just wanted to very briefly introduce the IPCC. You probably know of it already. It's a process, government-led process to assess the available knowledge in the literature on issues around climate change. It addresses what we know around the physical aspects of climate change, the vulnerability aspect, impact, risk, and adaptation, and also mitigation. And the sixth assessment cycle was just concluded, and I wanted to share that health is has been very integral to this latest assessment. So the part of the IPCC that assesses the physical climate aspects of climate change has looked at, for example, short-lived climate forces, so pollutants, and the connections to health, particularly respiratory diseases. And then there's been a comprehensive assessment of indices related to climate change that are relevant for the health sector. So we have a very comprehensive assessment of how changes in extremes and mean conditions may influence different sectors, but particularly health. So it's, I think, quite interesting to go and look at the available information. When you look at Working Group 2, which is the report that addresses the vulnerability, impacts, risks, and adaptation aspects, I'm really happy to report that there is a dedicated chapter on health and climate change. And actually, all of the chapters in the report do consider health. So if you explore this document, it's divided sectorally and also by region. And so I think it's got a wealth of information which could be interesting to share more broadly with this community. And finally, there is the mitigation of climate change, where health has been one of the key dimensions against which co-benefits of mitigation options have been assessed. And so bringing this all together, we have a synthesis report, and it's really interesting to see how we can have synergies with the health benefits, both direct but also to the health system, when considering health as part of mitigation decisions, building resilience, and looking at the co-benefits of different mitigation options. So I was just basically going to give you this very, very brief overview. I want to flag that tomorrow in the IPCC and WMO Pavilion, which is in Building 88 at 9 o'clock, there's a sort of more comprehensive deep dive into the assessment of health-related aspects in this latest report. So I really invite you to go over there and see what you think. And obviously, thinking about the next cycle that is starting now, I'm very happy to report that as a delegation, as Italy, we have highlighted the climate change and health nexus as one of the priorities for the assessment going forwards. So in January next year, the work programme of the IPCC will be established by the governments, member parties, and I hope that we'll be able to identify, further progress in how we connect climate change issues with the health sector. So I really wanted to pick up some of the messages, for example, related to building resilience and how difficult it is to measure progress. And hopefully the kind of research that you're talking about will be available for the AR7, and we'll have this kind of information. And as you know, the conclusions of the IPCC are feeding directly into the multilateral process. So I just wanted to make that connection, as hopefully the IPCC is a very interesting platform for this community to communicate these important findings. I wanted to flag that the current assessment has actually been very comprehensive in assessing the context related to equity and social justice, including gender dimension. And I would say that there is a very strong emphasis also in how climate action, be it adaptation and mitigation, is taken, decisions are taken based on the evidence to inform sustainable and climate resilient development. So obviously health is one of the key dimensions that it is informing policymakers, and I find it's an excellent leverage to really push for enhanced action on climate change, given the co-benefits, including monetary, but also non-monetary, obviously. So I finished there. It was just a very brief highlight of the IPCC, and I hand over to Vito, and I think you'll hear some more detailed research outcomes that we hope to see in the IPCC.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please change the presentation. It's not my presentation.
Oh.
Sorry.
Yours?
You?
We'll change it here.
Ah, okay.
There's
Climate and human health. Can artificial intelligence help future global challenges?
that's Aparna's.
It's mine. Not this.
Not this. It's not on here.
This one? No.
No.
No, it's not. It's not in the directory.
Flash drive? Open the floor for questions or something. Is it good? Okay, that's good. I'm not fired.
Okay. Che devo fare?
Is it working now? Maybe. It's
Okay. Oh,
fine.
finally. Arianne Vito Telesca from University of Basilicata and Italian Society for Climate Science. The CISC is Italian Society for Climate Sciences. It was created to serve as a meeting point of scientists Okay, two scientists from different disciplines and all scholars that deal with climate-related sciences and their applications. The sixth aims at contributing to scientific progress and innovation of climatic sciences in Italy by promoting the convergence of disciplines and multidisciplinary research. Well, the adverse effect of climate and air pollution on health have gained solid scientific evidence in recent decades. The scientific literature available on this issue includes epidemiological, clinical, and toxicological studies with a wide and documented range of adverse health outcomes observed following short and long-term exposure to climate and air pollutants at the concentration levels to which, in general, mainly urban populations are subject, but also an extra-urban populations in the world, including areas with low and falling population rates. Children, including adolescents, are often more vulnerable than the general population to the health impacts to climate change because children's bodies are developing physically, which can make them more vulnerable to climate-related hazards like heat and poor air quality. Growth otherwise can lead to impaired mental health and stress, increasing the frequency of disasters with climate change, can lead to post-traumatic stress disorder, adjustment disorder, and depression. Changes in climate and global warming may require population to migrate, which can lead to acculturation stress. Reduced air quality from fires and higher temperatures from a warming climate can cause mouth to be drier, making people more prone to oral disease and tooth decay. Increasing the psychological stress from extreme weather events can increase the risk for teeth bleeding and temporomandibular joint disorders. An increasing body of evidence exists regarding how climate change may affect human health, and notably the emergence of and spread of diseases. For instance, heat and acute coronary syndromes, climate change and malaria, solar activity, and chromosomes aberrations. These findings illustrate further the research outputs were situated greatly in China, and where there was the dominant meteorological variable, and the majority of the papers utilized statistical methodologies in the form of regression analysis to determine the relationship between climate and health. Researchers achieved this by utilizing hospitalization data. Researchers examined the link between temperature and cardiovascular disease in nations like Italy and Korea, and those in the Middle East. Evaluated the link between solar activity and chromosome abnormalities. Overall diseases differ by demographic and geographic location, and they evolve with time. In this graph, we can see the trend of the distribution, the disease category as a function of variables, climatic and air pollution variables. It is possible to see, note that the temperature is the variable most important for all diseases, and then relative humidity. This graph confirms that the majority of studies utilized statistical methodologies in the form of regression analysis to determine the relationship between climate and health. But in recent years, the machine learning a way to identify patterns in data and use them to automatically make prediction or decisions. Machine learning, the type of machine learning is divided by supervised learning, unsupervised learning, semi-supervised learning, and reinforced learning. In particular, two topics, important topics for machine learning are the regression and classification method. Machine learning, data machine learning is divided in two parts: the training set, the testing test. The testing test set is a part of data unknown by the model. And is elaborated after the phase of training set. This is a general step-by-step process for building ML model. It consists essentially in pre-processing phases, a feature selection for reduction of a variable correlated with other variable, and then il model training phase. In a phase of test data and compare the results, and then the prediction. Here I show a recent work related to analyze the interaction between climate and health in southern Italy, in Bari. Il database consists in daily emergency room admissions. That the range, the database is a longer 7 years. Including as variables weather and air quality data. Here, a random forest model was used to simulate the trend of hospital admission for cardiovascular diseases. We can see a good trend, a good simulation, a little difference between original data and simulated data, and also the error bands of the model. The most percentage is ranging from minus 5% and plus 5%, and the future importance, the ranking of variables most important, show the atmospheric pressure and the temperature, minimum temperature, and monoxide of carbon as variable that influenced the phenomenon. And finally, we propose an integrated approach to evaluate climate-human health relationship for optimal management of emergency admission room. The first here. Thank you so much. We have climate data as the temperature, atmospheric pressure, and relative humidity, and so on, and water quality, air water quality, air quality, as PM10 and NOx, and so on. After the correlation analysis with the Pearson and Sparman procedure and the feature selection. The second phase consists in a model elaboration, model building between by machine and deep learning models as random forest decision tree models and neural network like CNN, a convolutional neural network, a recursive neural network, and LSTM, long short time neural network, merged with the statistical models as DLNM by Gasparini, that is a model that used in bibliography for determine the relative risk as a function of time lags. Then the future importance, the ranking, and as a work, a previous work. But the news is the classification analysis and the recursive use of machine and deep learning models that determine the range of important features. And in the link with meteorological model to predict that range and to arrive at decision support to management of emergency admission room. This is a framework we propose. Okay, I concluded. Thanks for your attention, and please, next presentation.
Okay, thank you. First of all, leaving the opportunity to be grateful to the Italian Society for Climate Sciences to give the opportunity to present, to introduce this transdisciplinary work approach on the use of climate data and statistical tool for the heat health nexus. I perform the first part of this presentation. After, I will leave the floor to my colleague Marta Elena. So, we work at CMCC, that is the Euro-Mediterranean Center of Climate Change. This center is a foundation that covers climate in all the aspects, thanks to the activity of 3 research institutes, the one for Earth system predictions, the second institute for climate resilience, in which Marta and I and Paola Mercogliano, that is the other author, work. The latter is the European Institute on Economics and Environment. As introduced before by Anna, we are the focal point for Italy of the IPCC. So, first of all, a brief forward. Cities is an hotspot for climate change. Indeed, cities have a unique microclimate characterized by the presence of artificial surfaces that absorb and release slowly heat, producing the so-called effect of urban heat island, and are surfaces that are not able to store water, so allow urban flooding. And climate change can be viewed as a multiplier of this kind of hazard on this built environment and, of course, on the people. Moreover, demographics, production, consumption practices, and population lifestyle further influence the impact of climate change in cities, and urban vulnerability depends on public awareness and sensitivity of these issues. So we put a lot of ingredients in this slide. In this picture, you can see two authoritative products by the Copernicus Climate Change. The first one in the upper side, an urban Italian representation provided by Vito. In the lower part, the results of a project that involve CMCC and other institutions in which we perform a pluvial flooding analysis. And these are the results. So, cities are our topic. Of course, so the science need to move from the global characterization of the climate through our global model to a more focused characterization of climate on city, arriving to detect specific peculiarity of the city. This approach is called the downscaling. But of course, downscaling is not only somewhat related to an increase of resolution. Of course, we need to have the ability to reproduce the dynamics that introduced before. So, dynamics like the presence of more heat in city, dynamics like the increase of subdaily, also then hourly precipitation, mainly extreme precipitation, and of course the ability to capture, to reproduce a specific orographic pattern, because of course enhancing the climate resolution we are able to detect better orography. So the research advancement related to the urban scale are here reported. In these pictures is reported a synthetic experiment performed by some colleagues, Marianna Ridolfi and Mario Raffa, that compare a model that includes urban parametrization with a model, with a climate model that does not include an urban parametrization. And these new approaches, this parametrization now are able to detect the heat island in city, as you can see from the red balls in this picture. But which are the challenges that we need to tackle? We need to have spatial and temporal resolution, higher spatial and temporal resolution climate data, so kilometer scale and hour resolution scale. We need open data that can be used for different studies like the one related to the health. We need to use also microclimatic model, so able to detect the single buildings to study urban microclimate. We need methodology to georeference this information, so to have a view on a georeferenced maps. And of course, we need application that allow the use of climate data to the end user, so a sort of end-to-end approach. And which we performed at CMCC. In last year at CMCC, we ran different simulations at convection permitting scale, that is the scale described in the previous slide, covering the Alpine region, covering more than 20 European cities, and the most important one, a simulation over the whole Italian peninsula. And these data are unique in our field, because you are able now to download throughout the data delivery system of CMCC, so an open access platform, products that come from the downscale, dynamical downscaling of ERA 5, so of a climate reanalysis, that is something that describes the past and recent climate over Italy at 2 kilometers for the recent climate. But most important, we have also climate projection with 2 RSP scenario for Italy. Of course, our advice is to use this data for research purposes, because are single model, single realization. There is not an ensemble like in the use of traditional climate data. But this gives the opportunity to study, to enhance our awareness, also tackling the uncertainty using a new approach, and specifically the idea to merge dynamical downscaling with statistical downscaling based, for example, on artificial intelligence methods that allow us to tackle uncertainty, reducing computational time. As you can see in this picture, a statistical downscaling of area requires 2.5 minutes, a dynamical downscaling of area requires 50 days, and of course exploiting new scientific approaches. Now I will leave the floor to my colleague Marta that will conclude the presentation showing an application of how long-time series of climate data can be merged to other data to analyze the heat health nexus. Thank you, Marta.
We only have about 2 or 3 more minutes left in this segment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alfredo. So I just wanted to introduce a case study that we run in Italy. We focus on all the studies available in the literature since 2000 onwards in order to see which indicator can be used into a framework that can be easy and flexible to be reproduced in other urban contexts, so as to consider the social inequalities of the population across cities, but also the built environment characteristics which can influence the heat health nexus. For this reason, we pick up Turin as a case study. That is a city in the northwest, because we have the longest time series on which we can merge health data together with the socioeconomic data of the individuals with the residents of the people living in this city. Why is Italy? Because Italy holds the, let's say, highest heat attributable mortality across several places in the world, considering the extreme heat. So in these few maps, you can see some results that we reached. The one red and yellow represents the urban heat island distribution across the city at the census tract scale. The one, let's say, brown, it is considering the distribution of the old population across the city. And the other 2 maps relate to sensitivity and adaptive capacity. Since, let's say, sensitivity, which sensitivity we considered all the socioeconomic variables who can influence the risks, who can act in the, let's say, have some influence in the final risks of the old population across the city. And with adaptive capacity, we considered those characteristics of the built environment who can decrease the vulnerability of the person, of the comfort in that specific areas of the city. All these, let's say, maps have been put together into a framework that is based, of course, on the IPCC frameworks related to hazard, vulnerability, and exposure, in order to highlight in the area which are the hotspots across the city of Turin who can be taken into account as a priority in order to understand how to structure the heat early warning system across the city. This case study was useful in order to understand which methodology can be reproposed to other contexts. Of course, data in this case are really important because this methodology is based on data. At the same time, taking into account these results, it will be possible to prioritize which adaptation measures taken in place from the policymakers, but also not only have, let's say, soft measures in terms of adaptation, but also hard measures. In this slide, you can see some examples, just to mention which kind of adaptation measures can be considered based on our results. And with this, I finish. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, good evening. I'm Aparna Roy. I am the fellow and lead of a policy think tank called Observer Research Foundation. We have our offices in India and America, and we primarily work on the areas of foreign policy, strategic affairs, but the department that I'm a part of deals with cross-cutting development-related research, ranging from climate to technology to public health. And because it's cross-cutting, we have recently started delving into the subject of climate and health, so to generate important insights that could inform policy, not just globally, but locally as well, even at the subnational level where it's most required. To begin with, I can't emphasize enough, and we have been reiterating this throughout this evening, that the relationship between global health and climate change is profound and multidimensional. Just to again remind all of us how climate change is already causing widespread impact across the globe and exacerbating existing health vulnerabilities. Extreme weather events such as heat wave, flood, hurricanes contribute to the spread of infectious diseases, disrupt health systems, and strain the resources. And this especially puts the developing countries more at most of the vulnerability because the resources here are already strained. Climate-induced disruption to food and water supplies are further compromising nutrition and sanitation outcomes, resulting in much adverse health outcomes. It's also undermining many of the social determinants for good health, such as livelihood, equity, access to healthcare, and social support structures. Especially countries that have historically contributed least to greenhouse gas emissions are the ones that are bearing the most adverse ramification of climate change today. Now, we believe that unless current patterns are reversed, vulnerable population, especially women, indigenous communities, the elderly, and those with pre-existing health conditions will suffer the most acute health impact of climate change. This is why at ORF we are now delving deep to unearth the intricate link between climate justice and health equity. We have recently at a pre-COP event at Abu Dhabi launched a compendium called Converging Path, Global Governance for Climate Justice and Health Equity that calls for the creation of global governance framework that are better aligned to ensure global equity and justice. And I'm here to present the major outcome that comes out of that compendium. Just to give you a context of the jargons that we are mentioning, climate justice, health equity, the principle of climate justice is rooted in the idea that the burden of climate change should not disproportionately fall on those that are least responsible for creating the crisis. The aim should be the equitable distribution of resources and responsibility across the world. Mirroring the goals of climate justice, global health equity refers to the principle of ensuring that every individual has a fair opportunity to achieve their full health potential, regardless of geographic location, race, ethnicity, economic status, gender, age, or other socially determined circumstance. Now, just a very brief overview when we talk about vulnerability, that who are vulnerable, right? So this is not the end part, but communities across the world vary in their vulnerability to climate-induced health risk, and vulnerability is influenced by a combination of factors which ranges from geography, socioeconomic condition, infrastructure, access to basic needs and resources. However, certain regions and groups tend to be more susceptible to health impact of climate change, and here are some of the examples. Low-income countries, which are particularly those in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia, often face higher vulnerability due to the limited resources for healthcare infrastructure and adaptive measure. Island nations, said small island developing states, are particularly vulnerable to climate change, including health impact, rising sea level, extreme weather events, change in precipitation pattern can have severe consequences on this nation. Similarly, our indigenous communities in the Arctic are extremely vulnerable due to rapid warming of the region that it is now undergoing, leading to change in their traditional lifestyle, impact on food security, and the introduction of newer health risks. Coastal community, again, because of sea level rise, storm surges, cyclones that are increasing in intensity, saltwater intrusion into freshwater sources, which affect drinking water quality. Urban poor, because the settlements in many of these regions lack inadequate resources, leading to increased exposure to heat wave, floods, and diseases. Agriculture community, agriculture yields, change in precipitation pattern, extreme weather event, and shift in disease vector that can affect crop yields and food security. Elderly and children, because they are vulnerable to many of the climate impact, including extreme heat. And countries with weak health system, especially across developing South with limited infrastructure, is more vulnerable to many of the health risks that arise out of the climate change impact. How climate change exacerbate health risk, I would not take you in the interest of time through each of these, but this is just a map out of, we found in our study that how climate change impacts the disease profile, which further impact the vulnerability of the population. Now, as we proceed, in one of the sections, we decided to delve deeper, though not all, but some of the systemic intersectionalities of climate and health. We begin with how we need to reimagine future of food for global well-being and health equity. Because climate change poses a grave threat to the food production, altering agricultural landscape, and challenges that it's posing to global food security. Changing climate conditions are contributing heavily to the spreads of pests and diseases, which further jeopardize crops. Smallholder farmers, already vulnerable, face heightened risk, impacting their livelihood and exacerbating poverty. Additionally, ocean acidification and warming disrupt marine ecosystem, affecting food stocks and fisheries, and therefore urgent adaptation measures, sustainable agricultural practices, and international cooperation are essential to mitigate the escalating impact of climate change on food. But paradoxically, the agriculture, forestry, and other forms of land use sector which is designed to nourish the planet, contributes 22% to global greenhouse gas emission, and unsustainable agriculture expansion driven by unhealthy diet damages ecosystem, causes pollution, and disrupts biodiversity, creating irreversible effects. So concrete action, not just across politics, but economics, culture, environment, and society are extremely crucial. Promoting food policies that incentivize eco-conscious farming, preserving local knowledge and heritage, and investing in climate-resilient agriculture systems are key measures to pursue. The second, ongoing climate crisis, we know possesses severe threat to human health, particularly impacting vulnerable population with intersecting disadvantages. Now, women and girls, who constitute majority of the world's poorest, face heightened health risk, and gender inequalities that are already existent increase their vulnerability during natural disaster. 80% of the globally displaced individuals due to climate crisis are women, and exposing them to elevated risk of violence, included sexual violence, during climate change impact. Climate change also affects sexual and reproductive health, as seen during 2022 floods in Pakistan, where pregnant women have faced challenges accessing maternal health services. COP28, with its focus on Health Day and the Climate Head Ministerial, therefore presents a very crucial opportunity to integrate gender equality and climate adaptation. The effectiveness of such integration depends on moving beyond gender-sensitive languages to practical implementation, addressing policy fragmentation, and ensuring sufficient finance for gender-responsive climate action. The third one, climate migration have now started gaining attention in COP28, where discussion focus on the intersection of climate change, migration, and health. While human migration has historically responded to environmental changes, climate change now accelerates displacements globally, which are going through a lot of environmental threats. Just the data to share, in 2022 alone, 32.6% million people were internally displaced due to natural disasters, highlighting how urgent is this issue in hand. Now, climate change acts as a threat multiplier, which exacerbates not just equality, but disrupts lifestyle and strain the local services, particularly in fragile and conflict-affected countries. The last intersection that we delved on was climate, health, and cities. During the COVID-19 pandemic, that underscored an intricate relationship between climate change, disease outbreak, and their impact on vulnerable population, emphasizing the pivotal role of the cities in addressing health emergencies. And many cities of the developing nation failed on the face of it. So lessons from the pandemic reveal that societal, economic, and political factors intensifying the consequence of climate change and pandemic on disadvantaged group, promoting the need for strategic mitigation approaches. I'll delve deeper on this when I come to the strategies that we are looking at. Okay, so before I delve into the strategies, just context that the recently concluded G20 has taken unanimous and significant step towards prioritizing climate-resilient health system, recognizing the critical need for deeper understanding of the intricate interlinkage that exists between climate and health. Now, this COP is a milestone because it placed a renewed emphasis on the intersection of climate and health and introduced the Health Day and Climate Health Ministerial that highlight the crucial role of health in global climate agenda. Now, for the COP, what we derived, certain action points that we derived out of our study is, number one, that we need to really support interdisciplinary research to generate evidence on global burden of disease due to climate change and integrate more data on climate and health. This integrated research there is clear division that currently exists. For instance, between, say, early warning system for climate-related hazards and for pandemic or infectious diseases. The expertise in climate change and health sectors rarely converge, hindering more collaborative efforts and solutions. The assessment of risk at a population level right now remains inadequate, and health impact projections due to climate change are typically based on obsolete data. So new data on the worldwide disease impact from climate change is extremely crucial, and majority of investment in global health research go into genetics, diagnosis, and treatment, and tend to overlook the foundational environmental drivers and cause of health outcome, and this is something that needs to change. The new One Health approach is something that holds a lot of promise in kind of coordinating health and climate agenda together. We need to, again, prioritize gender and health. Gender integration and inclusive climate action to promote an equitable and resilient future is extremely important now. Promoting holistic reforms in food system, including eco-conscious farming and the use of resilient technology, will go a long way to build resilience to the food sector and hold promise for global food insecurity, which is on the rise largely due to climate-related factors. The UNFCCC's Coronavia joint work on agriculture and food system reform must recognize the need for reforms in the way we look at the future of food. then there is a need to enhance pandemic prevention and preparedness to address interrelated health, environmental, and societal challenges, particularly in cities. We have drawn a lot of lessons from the cities already on how crippled we were on the face of an uncertain crisis. And until and unless we look at building resilience of cities in greater depth and look at it from an intersectional lens of addressing climate change and health impact together, we won't be able to address this crisis in a more holistic way. And increase climate adaptation, funding for healthcare by exploring new funding resources and promoting equity in climate and health investment. Climate adaptation funding right now falls short in all areas, including healthcare. Mere funding support, financial support is allocated to health sector for climate-related issue, and global health funding rarely ever addresses climate adaptation. This critical situation is worsened by the strain that the pandemic has placed on the healthcare systems, and substantial financial resources are needed to bolster health systems that are ill-prepared for increasing health risk of climate change. And the global community right now should actively explore avenues to generate new funds, such as reforming subsidies for fossil fuels and direct these funds back into healthcare. Adaptation funding mechanism for climate adaptation, including the adaptation fund, should prioritize health equity and climate justice. And lastly, to correct historical inequalities, a large share of international funding should be allocated to health protection and promotion in vulnerable regions, with a particular emphasis on local adaptation. Finally, COP28 should transform the loss and damage funding commitment made at COP27 into actionable measures. The health impact, especially those that do not lead to mortality and ones related to mental health, can be difficult to quantify in monetary terms. And developing framework for compensation and support to vulnerable populations who suffer health losses are critical to operationalize. Lastly, there is a need to integrate Paris Agreement and SDGs and recalibrate the SDGs principle to prioritize poverty, health, and climate. They both are traveling towards the same outcome. We shouldn't look at them different from each other. Oh, that was not last, sorry. Lastly, we need to address climate change and environmental rights comprehensively in the WHO Pandemic Agreement. In October 2023, WHO's intergovernmental negotiating body unveiled a draft of WHO Pandemic Agreement presenting a collective framework for states to adapt future pandemic. Now, it is critical for us to push the comprehensive agreement that bolsters preparedness, response, and coordination against infectious disease and public health emergencies, adequately emphasizing their connection to climate change. Such an agreement should directly tackle the impacts of environmental changes, including climate change, biodiversity loss, and land degradation on increasing the pandemic risk. I will skip through the others because they are sort of repetition of what we have just discussed. But what I would like to emphasize is that communication, as I mentioned throughout unanimously, what the report says is that communication due to health risk, communication on health risk due to climate change is pretty underdeveloped, but health can be a powerful driver for climate initiatives. And instead of focusing solely on negative outcome, positive communication and health benefits of climate action and low carbon lifestyle can influence values, encourage social behavior, behavioral change for mitigation, and build more equitable and just societies. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, everybody. We have a little bit of time for a few questions. Go ahead. Yeah, start with.
Oh, 1 second, I think.
Thank you. To my colleagues on the left, you had a wonderful presentation on different institutions that prioritize climate change and health. So from your analysis, if funding wasn't an issue and and also talent pool. So if you had limited funding, unlimited talent pool, what would be the ideal research institution for climate change and health?
So funding is an issue, given that only 0.5% of the current funding structure for climate change is dedicated to health globally. And the talent pool's there, but in health, the talent pool is evolving. And there are new researchers coming into the fold, changing their identity, their professional identity, to focus more at this intersections that is changing. So it is hard to know how that'll all land as the funding increases, as participation increases. One thing though we can say in the second phase of our work, we're going to actually explore very much what you're asking, is that where have the successes been? Where have the points of growth, the points of impact occurred? And we're going to explore that in a deep level through a more in-depth analysis, and I think we'll have a better sense of that then. Would you like to add anything?
And I guess to more directly answer your question, an ideal center, as I might envision one, two key areas I think are really crucial. For me, an ideal center would be as inclusive as possible in integrating the voices and perspectives and knowledge of the most impacted communities into the very beginning of, into setting the research agenda, into asking the questions, not just, directing their work to benefit these communities, but involving them in the work from the get-go. So I think that is very crucial. Because, research centers, these are privileged entities, and it's really important. Given that these entities are seeking to be as impactful as possible on the ground, I think integrating communities into its work from the get-go is really crucial. The other thing that I like to think about, some of the educational curricula is kind of hitting on this, but climate change is such a complex and ever-evolving thing, and so some of the educational efforts around climate and health are trying to establish more habits of mind. So it's less about teaching about a particular climate change issue or topic or expertise. It's kind of like establishing the ability to kind of be nimble, to be fast, to kind of pivot in new directions, to work across fields, to be flexible. So for me, an ideal research center would really be exploring how to kind of create a research field, create educational training opportunities that could act that way, rather than being siloed in one particular area of climate and health, or one particular health outcome, for example.
Thank you. If I could have a follow-up, going away from traditional indicators of success in this ideal research center, how would you, redefine success for your research center in terms of key indicators?
Also, anyone else can feel free to weigh in if they'd like.
At this stage,
We don't want to dominate.
Yeah.
It's a good question. Yeah, indicators of success.
Yeah, and I think if I were to build on what Jen just said, I think the indicator of success would be research that moves, that really is informed by communities for communities. Because I think right now of all the centers that we looked at, there was only one center that had that sort of reciprocal model built into at least its forward-facing interface. That doesn't mean that the other centers don't. They just may not be articulating it in that forward-facing interface. So.
And I think also, some of our work within our center with communities, what it's shown also is we tend to look at kind of very maybe technical or very specific scientific indicators. And what some communities have communicated is that we need to look at this more holistically, because climate change affects so many aspects of physical, mental, and social well-being. And so communities have been working with us and with faculty who's affiliated with our center to really kind of expand how we imagine a climate solution could look, what the climate solution should be impacting, what they are interested in, what impacts they are seeing, what they would like to see improved. So that's not a very specific indicator, but maybe an expansion of indicators to be more holistic for kind of the entire lived experience of health and well-being. rather than simply a technical definition.
I think that might be all the time we have for questions.
Oh, well, we have a few more seconds.
Few more
Let's
seconds?
go- Yeah,
Okay.
let's,
We've got
let's
seconds,
please
we've
go
got
for it.
seconds.
Yes.
Seconds? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Juba Said Tusulira from Uganda, and I'm part of the Climate Adaptation Research Program, which is a network of 13 universities in Africa. And I'm here representing the early career researchers in my continent. And we are supported by the University of Arizona. Now, when it comes to health impacts of climate change, we need evidence. And enough, what we are finding as a challenge is, how do you say that these epidemics are caused by climate change? It's a question we get from our policymakers, from our politicians, because many believe that climate change is an issue of the West, and since we are not polluters, these big-time polluters, so all solutions should come from the West, and then the West, so, but there is no evidence for it, and that's the main question. How do you tell us that this increase in malaria and in parasites is due to climate change? And I want to just add a bit so you can understand the lacuna here. So now, as the researchers who are presenting showed us how they do modeling here in other parts of the world, in Italy, that you get the climate data and you get the health data. However, in Africa, you can find climate data for the last 40 years.
Hello?
But
Hello. Hi, I apologize for the interruption of your question. I'm sorry, but it is 5 minutes due to the meeting time, and unfortunately, you have to wrap up. So I would appreciate the
Why don't
to answer the question.
we group? Yeah, we can group and talk about it.
Yeah, maybe off the stage. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll meet outside. Is that okay? We can continue this conversation.
That's fine.
It's okay. But what I was saying is, so we have climate data, we don't have health data because of poor data systems and governments change, put it as broken systems. So we can't say that we have this data for health and data for climate. So we can't create that evidence. So I wonder from your side where you stand or sit, how would you give evidence that these epidemics